the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, episode 26.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to another edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray. So good to have you. And today we have on John Thibault, founder and CEO of iLobby and the author of the #1 international bestseller, How to Change the Law. John, how's it going today?
Very good. Thanks for having me on today. I'm really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, well, as you can imagine, anytime we talk about energy, legislation is always, in the forefront. And so we appreciate you coming on, and it's going to be an interesting discussion, I think. But kind of tell me how you kind of got into this field. What drew you to this kind of how to change the law mindset?
Yeah, it actually goes back a few years. Before I worked at eBay, when we started up, I was actually working at MCA Universal Studios in government affairs. And what I discovered was that with the entertainment industry and the studios, they access lobbyists and attorneys, and they work with Washington politicians on an ongoing basis and really carved out the kind of legislation that they wanted. Fast forward 10 or 15 years or so, and I'm discovering that lots of friends I know up here in Silicon Valley in the tech industry are frustrated, as is everybody, because they can't get anything done. And what I realized was that companies that have been around for a while had government affairs departments and understood how to work with the government and with, any kind of legislative branch, whereas newer companies and smaller businesses generally did not. So I thought, well, I had an understanding of how this worked. And the more I realized the problems people were mentioning to me, I realized that, you know what, somebody else is solving this problem, and maybe there's a way to help you out with this.
Okay, great. And so our audience is, as you can imagine, energy experts, and so very diverse. We have people from renewables to oil and gas to all over to people who are probably just, loosely affiliated with energy, just kind of depending on where they fall in. Let's say that if you're someone who is in energy and you're looking at some of the policies, maybe the Trump administration or the Obama administration or even the local government has kind of restricted your ability to maybe make income, make your product, to sell your product, where do you start at to kind of say, okay, we want to look towards changing some legislation? What do we do?
Yeah, I think the first couple of things you need to do are you need to really figure out your issue. And you also, as you described, you need to identify what level of government you're dealing with. And as you start breaking this down, you say, is it federal, state, or local? And you go through that exercise. And then is it regulatory within the agencies, or is it legislative in terms of working with Congress, the House, or your state legislatures? And that's really part of it. Two things I think are interesting are I've heard that it's actually much easier to stop a bill than it is to get one going. So if somebody is mounting a piece of legislation and you want to oppose it, it's a lot easier to just keep that from happening by raising your voice and saying, hey, stop this, than it is to carve out a thoughtful piece of legislation and say, look, here's what we want to do. And so that's really the starting point. You need to know what your key issue is.
Okay, well, that's really helpful. So let me kind of ask this question, because a lot of what we see is stuff, maybe a county or a parish, if you're in Louisiana, is trying to roll out some legislation, and then the state comes in and they have their opinion, and the federal level has their own opinion. How do you balance it out when you've got maybe 2 to 3 different entities that have their own opinion on what the policy should be?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting conundrum, really. What happens, obviously, is that federal legislation often trumps state legislation, so you need to deal with those different levels. If if we isolate it and say, look, it's only a federal law, and you need to either work through it, or you want to get an amendment to something, or you want to change something, you want to get really clear and specific about what you want to do. A lobbyist in Washington told me about a year ago, he said, I don't care what idea you have, I guarantee you there's a piece of legislation related to that. Generally speaking, there are around 10,000 pieces of legislation rolling through every session, and they only pass about 3%. So you want to figure out, does the issue you're dealing with already exist, and therefore you can sort of dovetail onto that, or is it something that's unique and you have to start from scratch?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up there. Where would people get some, maybe a tool on the internet that they could find out where this information might be, so they could say, okay, I would like to see what legislation is available. Where should they start at?
Yeah, I actually think a really good site is congress.gov. And it's a federal site, and it gives you all the latest legislation that's up there. Actually, before we got on the call, I took a look at anything related to energy. And then the other thing that's interesting is you end up dealing with the committee. So I went into the Energy and Commerce Committee, and they have all the legislation that they're dealing with, and it's all broken down in terms of, has the bill been approved by a subcommittee or the full committee or the House, or is it signed into law? But just going to that, there's probably 20 different bills that are floating around, everything from chip reauthorization to the North American Energy Security and Infrastructure Act. And little by little, you look at this and you start learning the language. It's HR 8 or HR 6 or HR 161. So part of it is somebody dives into that. And just one quick thing here. Most people get overwhelmed by this, but that's really the role of the government affairs person or the lobbyist. That's really what they're going to do. They're going to understand how this is moving through the House, who to contact, and how to get stuff done.
Okay, so you've mentioned lobbyists a few times, and so I want to ask about that. So let's say that you kind of gotten in here and you say, okay, this is the legislation that I want to stop, or this is what I want to move forward, whatever the case may be. Is it better to kind of go grassroots or just to go straight for some kind of lobbyist organization to help you out?
Yeah, the focus of what we're doing is we're saying, look, figure out your issue first, debate it in an online open debate so you don't have this this problem they had with the healthcare bill where they really didn't have a term sheet. They were just arguing about it and then trying to get a contract at the very end, which obviously didn't go through. So what happens is if you have the public, regular people who have their boots on the ground and they understand what's going on, they debate this issue back and forth in an open environment, and then they say, you know what, we have an answer to this particular problem. What we're proposing is that you solve the problem, and then you say, look, if we're really serious about it, let's put some money into this. In other words, we're not going to protest. We're not going to hold up signs and slogans and, just write to our congressman. We're going to act as a unified body. We have a clear idea on the solution we want to get done. And then we come together and say, look, let's put a little bit of money in. And what ends up happening is then what we would do is we would match you with a lobbyist or government affairs group whose practice area coincides with what you want to get done. So we're not asking you to get on a bus and go to Washington and try to set up meetings. You really don't have time for that. But you do have the ability to think through the legislation, and you do have the ability to put a little bit of money in. So we think of it as crowdsourced and crowdfunded lobbying.
Okay, so let me just kind of play devil's advocate here. People go, oh, lobbyists, they're just there to suck my money and to wine and dine congressmen and senators, and they're not really doing anything, but they are the problem. What would be your answer to that kind of objection?
Yeah, I love that question. What's interesting is the media has done such a great job of making everybody aware of how bad lobbyists are, when in fact it is a First Amendment right. What's interesting is that if you look at the large Fortune 100 or the large Fortune 500, they are all hiring lobbyists to get stuff done. It's no different than if you have a complex tax problem, you're not going to do it yourself. You're going to say, hey, we need to hire the best tax accounting firm to get this done. Or if we have a complex real estate or legal problem, we're going to hire an attorney or a law firm whose practice area coincides with this. The same thing with the government affairs function. So yeah, people bash them, but in reality, they're there all the time. They have the relationships. And what they do is they report out to the Senate on what their activities are, who they are, who they're meeting, what they have to get done. And it's only the few bad apples where you hear these press stories. And one final thing I find quite humorous is that some of the actual media companies who say, oh, lobbyists are terrible, and they report on it, and these are big networks, they actually hire lobbying firms to get and craft legislation. It's almost like a game where they say, hey, you better not do this. But in reality, you're going to have a much higher rate of success doing them than trying to do it on your own.
And one thing that's interesting, there's a book called Extortion by Schweitzer, maybe is the author. I'll look it up and put in the show notes. And his premise is really that the big companies and the lobbyists, they're the ones that are kind of getting manhandled by the Congress and the senators. And he kind of goes through and walks out how they roll these bills out and how they slow play them so they make sure they get campaign contributions. And so reading through that book, it was kind of an interesting premise because I always looked at the lobbyists going, and then he's kind of saying, well, actually, it's the congressmen and the senators who are really holding these lobbyists' feet to the fire to make sure that they are getting money. And so it's kind of a role reversal there.
Yeah, it's really a crossover between campaign finance and then trying to get stuff done legislatively. I think what's interesting and what I'm advocating for is that smaller groups and individuals and grassroots folks need to get into the game, and they can do it for a lesser amount. And one thing that's interesting is typically in the past, a lobbying firm would charge a large company $1 million retainer and 12 months, and there's no quid pro quo. There's no guarantee that they're going to be able to get anything done. They simply can't promise that, and it's illegal anyway. So what's happened recently is a lot of these guys, or some of them anyway, have left the large firms and they said, you know what, we want to deal with clients on a more personalized basis. So they have these 3- and 4-person shops where they're saying, you know what, we will take on smaller clients and we'll do it not for $1 million a year, but we'll do it for $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 a month on a contingency basis for a 2 or 3 month period and do an exploratory look and see if we can get something done. And they're actually having success with that. It's no different than, getting a discount at Costco or Price Club or something like that.
Okay, great. So, one more quick question, then I'll talk about your book. So, let's say that someone says, okay, hey, I want to get involved, whether it may be pro-fracking, anti-fracking, solar, wind, wherever that in the energy business, and they say, okay, we want to get out and use this beautiful thing called the internet. We want to start this debate. We want to start this grassroots movement. What kind of time frame should they realistically expect before they can actually, see the change that they're looking to implement?
Yeah, there's really 3 key things that you need to do to make it happen. You need to have a clear message, you need to have a mass of people who agree with you, and then you need to have the money or resources or time to be able to move the thing forward. So I think when people think, oh, at the federal level, I'm going to get it done really fast. In reality, Congress is, as we know, unbelievably slow, and the Senate, the greatest deliberative body in the world, is even slower. So what happens is if you go to the state level, things can happen much more quickly. And if you go to the county or the local level, the same thing. But if you come in with a group of people who are voters in the district and everybody's aligned, you have a clear message, you know what you want to get done, and you've at least got some delegate or some person who's going to represent your group, you could actually move through things pretty quickly. I mean, I'm seeing that at the state level here in California, where there is a former senator who would have the constituents submit an idea for a bill, and within that session or within that season, he would actually move it forward and say, yeah, this is a great idea. We didn't think of it, and we'll get it on the floor and we'll get it done. And it's happened where they get every year 4 or 5 of these new bills from, citizen legislators who have ideas.
Okay, great. So kind of tell us about the book and what led you to write a book and to put it out there for the public to consume.
Yeah, the book was actually an outgrowth of having these long conversations with friends where they'd say, well, how does it work? What do you do? And these would turn into these 2-hour conversations. And I realized that I was getting asked the same questions over and over and over again. So I thought, you know what? Why don't I just condense it, put the key things in there, find some success cases, look at the myths that people have, and then see if there's a way to just shape that and then give people the sort of on-ramp to the iLobby platform. So in the chapter 7 of the book, it says, hey, if you really want to do something, you can go to iLobby and you can fill this stuff in. And it's a little bit like Kickstarter for issues, where you create your issue and then you share it through social media or through your company or however you want to do it. And little by little, you build up a following. But what we're doing in the background is we know your zip code, we know your congressional district, and then what starts to happen as the numbers build up is we're going to start matching you. If you said your issue was energy, but your congressman doesn't happen to sit on that committee, he's sitting on agriculture, well, he's not going to be that helpful to you. So what we want to do is we want to say who are the other members on the committee, who are the other constituents in the other districts. And it gets a bit wonky. That's why I don't talk about that too much, because it's really in the background. But the idea is if you have enough people from enough districts with diverse interests, eventually you're going to be able to move things forward. And when I've pitched this to politicians and to lobbyists, they're like, you're absolutely right. We totally get it. We totally understand it. What I found when I talked to average people, they were like, completely confused, like, oh, that can't be right. I have to get in a bus and go to Washington. So,
okay, and so you mentioned your book there a few times. So where can people find a free copy of this book at?
Yeah, you can get a free copy of the book at changealaw.com/book. That's changealaw.com/book. And then once you sign up and you're in there, You have the option, if you want, of getting the book through Amazon, or if you want, you can actually go to iLobby and get more information. We have videos on YouTube and a bunch of other material.
Okay, great. And we'll link to that in the show notes, guys, so you can pick up a free copy of this book. John, thank you so much for coming on. Is there anything else that you need to plug or promote before we get out of here today?
No, I just think that, I find it curious and interesting that, I think Americans need to get involved in the policy debate. I think that's really critical to the whole equation. I don't think they've had an easy way to do it. And what we're trying to do is say, you know what, if you read the book, if you get on the iLobby.co platform, at least it will be a beginning step for you to get into the game.
No, and absolutely. And energy professionals, as I laid off the show, we're always faced with some kind of regulation, whether it's good or bad, or wherever you come on that issue. There's always something coming down, and so I want to bring you on just to kind of give the listeners, hey, okay, this is a good way to start. This is a good way to be involved, because we do need to be involved with legislation as it's passed down from the state, local, or federal level. So thank you so much for coming on, and we hope to have you on again in the future.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Thanks again to John for coming on. Really enjoyed the discussion there. Guys, we as energy professionals need to be involved with current legislation, so check out his website, and you can find the link to all of that and everything else we discussed in the show notes. Until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.